The survival horror genre has arguably never been in a better place than it is right now. Not in the AAA space, of course, but since AAA gaming is practically dead at this point anyway, outside of Call of Duty and GTA, who really gives a shit? No, the indie space has been practically awash with outstanding survival horror games these last few years. Tormented Souls, Crow Country, Signalis, Alicia, Conscript, and a metric shit ton of others. In my opinion, indie games are the only thing keeping this industry alive at this point, and I probably would have quit gaming entirely a few years ago if not for them. Not only are indie horror games able to replicate those classic survival horror titles we all adored in our youth, but many of them feature mechanics and ideas that no AAA publisher would ever have touched with a 10-foot pole. From unique gameplay mechanics to wildly imaginative visual design, almost no two indie horror games will ever feel the same. So in this video, I've decided to highlight some horror games I've covered in the past that aren't only great games in their own right, aside from Dawn of Fear, but also feature unique ideas and mechanics not really seen in any other game I can think of. Hopefully by the end of this video, you will find a handful of really interesting horror games to check out. And if you do, please consider subscribing to my channel. It helps a huge amount. Thank you. And with that, on with the video. Alicia is an old school survival horror game, created and published by indie developer Casper Crows, and released for PC in October of 2021. The game was first announced as a Kickstarter project, with Casper requiring €20,000 in order to see his vision come to life. Thankfully, the Kickstarter ended up being a success, although many of the stretch goals were not met unfortunately. Alicia was developed almost entirely by Casper himself, with the music being composed by his girlfriend, who also happens to be the voice actress for Alicia. I've played dozens of survival horror games in my time, but I don't think I've ever played one with as much passion poured into it as Alicia. You can tell Casper absolutely adores the survival horror genre, because he just gets what made games like Resident Evil and Silent Hill so special. That said, the game still isn't perfect and might not appeal to people who aren't huge fans of the genre, but I'm getting ahead of myself.
Alright, listen up. Tonight, a spy stole important blueprints.
Alicia is set in a fictional land that does not have a name as far as I can tell. We play as Alicia, a young woman and member of an organisation called the Elite Royal Agent. Alicia and her companion are tasked with finding a man who stole some blueprints from the organisation, and so they set out by train to find him. While I hate starting this review off on a negative point, Alicia's story is one of its worst aspects. Nothing is explained, character development is non-existent, and the writing just feels clumsy and awkward.
Who are you? What is this place?
My name is Bo, and this is the dollhouse.
The dollhouse? No, really? What's going on here? And why am I wearing this dress?
Yes. Well, don't help you with that.
So little of this world is explained to the player. I mean, who are the Elite Royal Agent? What is their job role exactly? Who is Alicia and why did she choose to work for this organisation? What is so important about those blueprints and why should I give a fuck about finding them? If you were hoping to get answers to any of these questions, well, in the immortal words of Grimbeard,
go fuck yourself.
So yeah, I have a lot of issues with Alicia's story, but to be fair, I have issues with most horror stories. You know, I highly doubt a woman this good looking would actually fuck Frankenstein in real life. Anyways, now that I never have to mention this game's story again for the rest of my life, I can finally move on to talking about the game itself. As mentioned previously, Alicia is an old school survival horror game, akin to something like the original Resident Evil. The game features old PS1 era graphics that just charmed the pants off of me instantly. If you didn't grow up during the PS1 era, there is a good chance you won't see the appeal in visuals like this, but personally I can't get enough of these graphics. The game begins in a quaint countryside where Alicia is in no real danger of dying. This gives the player some time to become accustomed to a control scheme that would be considered rather archaic by today's standards. Video games that use tank controls are almost non-existent today, mainly due to most third-person games having the camera situated behind the player's back at all times. This is no bad thing, of course. These newer games are objectively easier to control than something like the original Silent Hill. But tank controls really are the only option when it comes to being able to adequately play games that have pre-rendered backgrounds or fixed camera angles. Alicia's controls are unquestionably going to be off-putting for a lot of players, but I urge those people to stick with them, because once the game's control scheme finally clicks with you, controlling Alicia will become second nature in no time. So as I was saying, Alicia and her companion are exploring the beautiful countryside looking for the fugitive when they come across a small village. You knock on one of the houses and a man invites you inside for a quick chat. This scene doesn't really add much to the overall narrative and didn't really have to be included in the game at all, but I still appreciated it being here. Alicia is a very cozy game, and moments like this just add to that feeling. The man witnessed the criminal running down a nearby road, so Alicia takes off after him.
Over there! It's him! Halt! Stop right there!
Vite! Let's get him!
Unfortunately, along the way, your companion swallows his toothpick and can't go with you any further.
Jan, what are you doing?
I swallowed my cure-dent!
Are you okay?
Go, Alisa! Don't let him s'échapper!
Here, use the rat signal in my back.
Here are the nominees for Best Performance.
Best performance.
We were meant for this, Nathan. We were destined for something great.
Jan, what are you doing?
I swallowed my cure-dent!
And the Game Award goes to...
I swallowed my cure-dent! I swallowed my cure-dent!
I know that last part wasn't that funny, but that's no reason to unsubscribe, buddy. I know you're thinking of clicking unsubscribe, but if you do that, I'll seriously fucking die. Anyways, just as Alicia is gaining on the criminal, he seemingly disappears into thin air, and Alicia encounters something she was not expecting.
Where did he go? What's going on? What kind of monsters?
While you have control over Alicia during this scene, you are still going to get your head caved in no matter what, so there's no real point in fighting back. Eventually, Alicia succumbs to the monsters and they pull her underground. We then get our title card. Pretty cool opening, all things considered. Alicia eventually comes to and finds herself in a strange room and an even stranger dress. Your first task is to find a way out of this room. A bedside locker nearby contains a gun and the key you will need to exit the room. In the next room, you are presented with a scene that will be instantly recognizable to anyone who has played the original Resident Evil before.
Excuse me.
Yes, there is no denying that Resident Evil 1 was the core inspiration for Alicia. The references are everywhere, from the level design, to the puzzles, and even some of the dialogue.
I was almost a sandwich.
Unfortunately, while Alicia carries over a lot of what was great about the original Resident Evil, it also carries over a lot of what didn't work too, like its aiming system for example. So for whatever reason, Alicia will not lock on to any targets she aims at. It's manual aiming all the way, baby. Which means you are going to end up missing plenty of shots because you were sure you were aiming at an enemy, but you were really aiming at the stairs instead. To compensate for this, Casper has added an aiming reticule that lights up when you are pointing at an enemy. This feature definitely helps, but I'm gonna be honest, the game should have an option that allows you to enable auto-aim, especially because some of the faster enemies are a complete fucking nightmare to kill without it. Anyways, once you dispose of the first zombie doll, you will notice that enemies in this game drop strange cog-like items when they die. These are called tooth wheels, and they function as the game's currency. Tooth wheels allow you to buy items from a shop run by an adorable puppet named Po. Aww, he's so cute. Reminds me of the puppet I used to have. Yeah, what did you want to show me? What? That's Disneyland. Why are you showing me this? What the fuck? Kill them all. What? I can't kill them. There's kids. Kill them all. No, I won't. You can't make me not again. Oh, why do I even try? You know I can't resist you. Po's shop is where you'll find a variety of weapons and items to purchase. You can even buy ammo, which is unusual to see in a survival horror game, but it makes sense here, since finding ammo pickups in the house is a surprisingly rare occurrence. You can also buy different dresses for Alicia, which are much more than simple cosmetic items. Each dress comes with a variety of different stat boosts. For example, the military uniform dress gives you a 10% defense increase, as well as the ability to reload your weapons faster. There is even a dress that allows you to swim faster in water, and it is pretty much a mandatory purchase if you are planning to finish the game. My advice is to save your tooth wheels and buy the military uniform as soon as possible. It will make the first few hours of the game a lot easier. Initially, I thought Alicia was going to simply rip off the entire mansion from the original Resident Evil, instead of creating its own unique environments. Thankfully, I couldn't have been more wrong. Alicia's level design is outstanding, and some of the best I have ever seen from the genre. Every room is well designed and fun to explore. More importantly, you are never stuck in the same looking location for too long. For example, the beginning of the game may take place in an ordinary looking house, but it isn't long before you find yourself in more surreal locations, like a circus filled with disturbing monsters, or an underwater palace crawling with weird, alien-like creatures. And the craziest thing is that it all works. No area feels out of place in Alicia. They all fit perfectly within this game's fantastically strange world. Enemy designs are also quite unique and unlike anything else seen in the genre. Most of the enemies are creepy, doll-like creatures who move about in a disturbingly unnatural way. While I wouldn't consider Alicia a scary game per se, it did manage to unnerve me on a few occasions. I mean, a cute clown waddling towards you so it can beat you to death with a baseball bat is terrifying enough when it happens in real life, so obviously shit like this is going to get a reaction out of me. There are also some fucked jump scares that But in my opinion, the horror in Alicia is never more effective than when it's trying to get under your skin. I just wish there were more moments like this. Puzzle solving is obviously a staple of any good survival horror game, and thankfully, Alicia's puzzles are one of the game's strongest aspects. They are all incredibly well designed, difficult enough that you may find yourself getting stuck from time to time, but never so difficult that you'll want to give up and look up the solution online. They are some of the best designed puzzles I have ever encountered in a survival horror game, which is good because there's a surprising amount of them. All in, I think there's a good 20 to 30 logic puzzles littered throughout the game. and yet they never became tiresome. I'm only showing a small handful of the puzzles in this video because I don't want to spoil any of the more interesting ones from the second half of the game. Boss fights are unfortunately a mixed bag in Alicia. Some of them are well designed and fun to fight, but due to the game's dated control scheme, some of them are a complete nightmare. The first boss fight pissed me off so much during my first playthrough that I almost stopped playing the game entirely. You need to avoid this guy's contraptions or you'll take a serious amount of damage and be knocked on your ass, unable to move. But since you can't move while aiming, it's almost impossible to get more than a single shot off without taking damage. I'm very surprised that a boss fight as broken as this made it into a game that's otherwise very well designed. Thankfully, this is the only boss fight like this, and the other boss fights fare far better, although some of them are still frustrating due to there not being an auto-aim feature. My first playthrough of Alicia took nearly 5.5 hours to complete, which is pretty lengthy for an indie game that only costs €15. However, the second playthrough I did for this video took less than half that time, so your mileage may vary. I found the game to be surprisingly replayable though, especially if you find enjoyment from speedrunning your favourite games. I usually don't bother trying to speedrun games, but I couldn't help myself with Alicia. The game is just so much fun to play. So overall, I love this game. It definitely has its issues and will feel unbearably outdated to some people, but if you grew up during the golden age for the survival horror genre, I can't see how you could possibly dislike this game. It has fantastic level design, brilliant puzzles, and engaging gameplay. The game is also suitable for all ages in my opinion, since there is no gore or bad language. So if you want to introduce your kids to the survival horror genre, but don't want to expose them to obscene levels of violence, this is a great game to do so with. I can't say enough good things about Alicia, and I will be supporting Casper's next project day one. Oh fuck. Jesus Christ. Anyways, I just wanted to quickly mention that if you're going to play Alicia, please remember to use a controller. It will make your life so much easier. Anyways, thanks guys. I'll see you soon. Tormented Souls is an old school survival horror game developed by...
Does anyone out there like me yet? Can I stop this?
Developed by Dual Effect and Abstract Digital, and it was released for PC and PS5 in August of 2021, with ports to all other major platforms arriving the following year. Critical reception to the game was quite mixed, at least on PS5. Many critics were impressed by the game's atmosphere, setting and puzzles, but others found the game to be incredibly dated from a mechanical standpoint, with its emphasis on fixed camera angles and clunky controls. Regardless, fans of old school survival horror games, such as myself, were very impressed by how faithfully the developers of Tormented Souls were able to replicate the feel of a classic survival horror game from the PS1 and PS2 era. If you are a fan of the classic Resident Evil and Silent Hill games, I think there's a good chance you could end up loving Tormented Souls, even if many of its gameplay mechanics are stolen outright from those earlier games. God, don't you just hate it when someone rips off another person's ideas? Tormented Souls begins with a woman named Caroline Walker receiving a mysterious letter at her home one morning. The letter was sent from a place named Wildberger Hospital. Inside the envelope is a photograph of two young girls with a message scrawled on the back that simply says, "You just think you can abandon us here?" 2 weeks later, and still haunted by the photographs he received, Caroline decides to visit Wildberger Hospital. Shortly after arriving at the hospital, however, Caroline is knocked unconscious and awakens sometime later in a bathtub with a large tube down her throat. Ha, I doubt this is the first time Caroline has been in the bathtub with a large tube down. Shut the fuck up, Ben.
Dude, really?
Upon getting dressed, Caroline notices something in a nearby mirror. There is a bandage covering her right eye. Upon removing the bandage, however, she discovers her right eye has been cut out. It's a surprisingly graphic scene and makes Caroline a very sympathizable protagonist, even this early into the game. The player is just automatically on her side from this point forward, despite barely knowing anything about her. Caroline is currently locked inside this small room, so your first task is to find a way out of here. This first room is a good area to get used to Tormented Souls' rather dated control scheme. There's even a clipboard in the room that teaches the player basic movement controls, which I thought was a nice touch. Thankfully, even if you aren't a fan of tank controls, you can still use the analog stick to control Caroline with a more beginner-friendly 2D control scheme. The best part is that you can seamlessly switch between 2D controls and 3D controls on the fly by moving between the D-pad and analog stick. Take note, developers, these are the kind of control options that all future old school survival horror games should have. Anyways, by examining the locked door, you will see that it doesn't have a handle. Doors usually have those. And this is where I get to talk about my favourite aspect of Tormented Souls. Its fantastic, stupidly clever puzzles. So by exploring the room you are currently in, you will find a cabinet. However, only the left door on the cabinet will currently open, since the right door is secured with a padlock. The left side of the cabinet has a pocket watch inside it. By opening the pocket watch, you'll see that it has stopped on a certain time. You enter this time into the padlock and voila, the lock is released. Inside the right side of the cabinet is a wrench. You immediately have the thought, hey, I can probably use this wrench as a makeshift door handle. However, the wrench won't fit around the nut, so you are basically fucked. Until you examine the wrench, that is, and find that its size can be adjusted. You try the wrench again, it fits perfectly, and you are finally out of the room. So instead of only having to solve one simple puzzle to escape from this room, you instead have to solve a series of progressively tougher puzzles in order to open the door. Even this early into the game, Tormented Souls is introducing you to its outstanding puzzle design. Once outside the room, you soon find a lighter, and it's an indispensable item during the first half of the game, since staying in the darkness for too long will result in Caroline being killed by an unknown force. Thankfully, the lighter will never run out of fluid, and so can be used indefinitely. Caroline continues to explore the seemingly abandoned hospital, but it isn't long before she discovers that she isn't alone in this place. So this is the first monster encounter in Tormented Souls, and just like in the original Resident Evil, your best option right now is just to run and find safety. Caroline escapes through a nearby door and meets an unfamiliar face in the next room. It's the friendly town priest, who absolutely won't turn out to be the actual villain of the game. The priest fills Caroline in on why the hospital is almost completely abandoned. Apparently, all of the patients and staff have moved to a nearby hospital, which would explain why the place feels so eerie and lifeless. The priest gives Caroline a weapon so that she can finally defend herself. This weapon is called the Nailer, and as you might expect, it uses nails as its ammunition. I really like the weapons in Tormented Souls. Instead of being the standard weapons that you regularly see in every single survival horror game, like your handgun or grenade launcher, most of Tormented Souls' weapons are pretty unconventional. I mean, even the game's shotgun is made from a few pipes that you combine together to form a weapon. Anyways, now that Caroline has a weapon, she can finally take on the creature in the hallway. So I suppose now is as good a time as any to talk about Tormented Souls' combat and monster design. Combat is pretty much what you would expect from an old school survival horror game, although it does have a few unique ideas of its own that puts its combat above what you'd see in many other early survival horror games. For example, while Caroline cannot move while aiming at enemies, she can perform a backwards dodge that allows her to avoid enemy attacks if timed correctly. The only problem is that your timing has to be absolutely perfect, or you'll probably end up taking damage. The dodge takes a lot of practice to master, but once you do, it's a useful tool to have in your arsenal. Enemies are quite resilient in Tormented Souls, and can take quite a few bullets to take down. This can be a problem since ammo is incredibly scarce during the first few hours of the game, and I found myself running dry on more than one occasion, which resulted in me having to rely on melee weapons instead. Thankfully, by searching every environment thoroughly, you can find a few well hidden ammo packs, which are invaluable during the first few areas of the game. Monster designs are incredibly creative and unique. They all look like they've been subjected to horrific experiments and are just looking for someone to end their torment. Wait a minute. End their torment? Oh, so that's why this game is called a creepy hospital adventure. Every enemy type requires a slightly different approach to defeat. For example, the wheelchair enemies are super fast and so need to be taken out from a distance, while on the other end of the spectrum, these slower enemies without legs can attack from a distance, so it's often best to get in close and finish them off as quickly as possible. Enemies hit surprisingly hard and will easily kill Caroline in 2 or 3 attacks. This can initially feel pretty unfair, and many players will probably find themselves dying several times over during the first few hours of the game. It also doesn't help that healing items are incredibly scarce in the game. Well, until you realise that some of them are hidden in completely bullshit locations. Again, you really need to search every nook and cranny if you want to increase your odds of getting through this game in one piece. As I mentioned earlier, staying in the dark can be lethal in Tormented Souls, so it's vital to always have your lighter equipped in darker areas. The problem with this, however, is that you can't use weapons while you have your lighter equipped, which basically means you are left completely defenseless while exploring these dark areas, which admittedly adds to the game's tension immensely. Occasionally you will find candles that can be lit, which will mercifully allow you to deal with any enemies in your vicinity, but these sources of light are few and far between. It's a shame that these short sections in darkness are really the only time Tormented Souls ever comes close to being genuinely scary, as most of the time it's a pretty tame experience. That being said, there are 1 or 2 very effective jump scares in the game, including one that calls back to the original Silent Hill. The game's soundtrack can also occasionally be effective at creating a tense, foreboding atmosphere, but for the most part, Tormented Souls isn't going to have you cowering behind the sofa from how scary it is. Speaking of the soundtrack, it is of a surprisingly high quality, especially when you consider that the game was made by a very small indie studio. A lot of the soundtrack consists of these industrial ambient tracks that can instill a feeling of anxiety in the player. These tracks might not be up to the same level of Akira Yamaoka's work in the Silent Hill series, but it's still good stuff. There are also some really nice piano pieces, like the track that plays at the main menu and the Save Room theme. My favourite piece, however, has to be the track titled Father. It's a truly beautiful piece of music that was still looping in my mind for weeks after I completed the game. I even have it on in the background when I'm performing my mundane, everyday chores around the house. The hospital that the game takes place in is truly massive in size. So much so that the physical copy of the game I got had a map included inside the game case. This physical map is kinda pointless, however, as the in-game map can be accessed with a single button press and is very easy to read. Despite the massive size of the hospital, I never got lost, as the building's layout is very well designed and memorable. Similar to the mansion in the original Resident Evil, After a few hours, exploring the hospital becomes second nature, and you will hardly need to use the map at all anymore. I also just love the design of Wildburger Hospital, its Gothic architecture, and the almost Victorian era design to many of its rooms. Tormented Souls is just one of the coziest survival horror games ever made. Trust me, play this game on a rainy night with the lights off and maybe beside a roaring fire, and it's just pure bliss. Tormented Souls' level design can sometimes feel like it's mimicking the Silent Hill series, and Silent Hill Origins specifically, especially with how you use mirrors to enter an alternate dimension in both games. In this alternate version of the hospital, the building is much more run down and decrepit, and it really feels like something straight out of an early Silent Hill game. It is also in this alternate dimension where some of my favourite puzzles in the game are found. For example, early in the game, you find this dead woman lying on an operating table. You need the item that the woman is holding in her hand, but because rigor mortis has already set in, it's practically impossible to get her hand open. However, while exploring the alternate dimension, you find a baby doll lying on the same operating table. Placing a plastic heart inside the baby will affect the dead woman in the real world. It is now possible to shock her body and get her to open her hand. My favourite part, however, happens once you leave the room. However, while many puzzles in Tormented Souls are very clever and fun to solve, some of them can border on nonsensical at times, like the puzzle where you need to find a code to open a door. I spent ages looking for this fucking code, until I realised what you are actually supposed to do is use a stethoscope on this statue to hear its heartbeat. Then go back to the door and use the statue's heartbeat as the door code. I mean, what the fuck? There are also a series of key puzzles later on that nearly caused me to quit the game entirely in frustration. So about halfway through the game, you get a key that has a series of dials that can be rotated to form a new key. This key is then used to open 4 doors around the hospital, and while I was able to figure out 2 of the puzzles by myself, the other 2 forced me to look up a guide to figure out the solution. This puzzle especially. You wouldn't fucking believe what the solution to this riddle is, even if I told you. It's such bullshit. Most of the time, however, solving puzzles in Tormented Souls is one of the most satisfying feelings in the world, especially the puzzle that takes place in this operating room. I won't spoil it here, but when I figured out the solution, I legitimately felt like a genius. I suppose one of the most frustrating aspects of Tormented Souls is its save system. So for some strange reason, Tormented Souls decided to implement a manual save system where you need to find limited items in order to save your progress. As a huge fan of the early Resident Evil games, I love this mechanic, as it makes the game a lot more tense, knowing that there is meaningful punishment for dying. The problem, however, is that there is no option to turn this feature off in Tormented Souls. I mean, even the Resident Evil 2 remake allowed you to play with an autosave feature if the ink ribbon system was too daunting for new players. It also doesn't help that the tapes required to save your progress in Tormented Souls are surprisingly rare, so you really do have to ration them carefully. Don't expect to be saving the game every 10 minutes, because if you do, you'll be totally fucked within the first 2 hours of the game. Unfortunately, for as many things as Tormented Souls gets right, it completely fumbles the ball when it comes to telling an interesting or engaging story. The biggest issue is that 90% of the story is told through diary entries, and there are so fucking many of these things in the game. You spend so much time reading in Tormented Souls, and the worst part is that you can't even ignore these documents, as some of them have puzzle solutions within them. Eventually, I just started zoning out every time I had to read them. I couldn't even tell you what most of these journals are even about. I mean, I guess I could look up a wiki or something, but that just sounds like a lot of effort, to be honest. please remember to like and subscribe. The unfortunate part is that there are some genuinely cool moments in the story, but they are buried under so much filler bullshit that I just completely lost interest in the narrative long before the end of the game. Tormented Souls is surprisingly well priced considering its production value and length. I admittedly paid a bit more to pick up the game physically, but you can also buy the game digitally for only $20. My first playthrough took me nearly 10 hours, with the second playthrough I did for this review only taking me about half that time. That's still a pretty meaty length for such a budget title, however. There are also plenty of reasons to replay the game, like to unlock all the different endings, or to achieve a higher endgame ranking. I honestly can't recommend the game enough at this price. It is a complete bargain. I should also quickly mention that the PS4 port of the game is excellent. I was worried that the devs would half-ass the last-gen versions of the game, but thankfully that wasn't the case. Tormented Souls ran perfectly for me, and aside from the odd bug and a single crash during my first playthrough, I found the PS4 version of the game to be perfectly playable. Tormented Souls is honestly one of my favourite survival horror games ever at this point. For a game developed by such a tiny studio, it is shocking how many things they were able to get right on their first attempt. I genuinely can't wait to see what these guys do next. I don't usually assign scores to the games I review, but if I did, Tormented Souls would be very close to a 10. It really is that good, and a must play for any fans of the genre. What? Where am I? Hello? Hello? Who are you?
Hello, Ben. I want you to play a game. My game, specifically.
Okay, and what if I refuse?
What if you refuse? Well, have a look.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Oh, someone get me out of here. Get me the fuck out of here. What the fuck? You sick fuck, no! Please! Okay, I'll do it! I'll do it! Murder House is a survival horror game developed by Puppet Combo and released in 2020 for PC. A year later, the game would also be ported to PS4, Nintendo Switch, and Xbox Series X. For this review, I will be primarily focusing on the PS4 version of the game. This version of the game does not include any additional content that was missing from the PC release. However, it does allow you to play the game at an unstable 60 FPS, which is very much appreciated. Murder House was a game I had somehow not even heard of until I spotted it on the PlayStation Store a few weeks ago. And let me tell you, from the first second I saw those Garbo PS1 character models, it was love. I had to play this game. It had everything I wanted from a survival horror. Fixed camera angles, limited resources, logic puzzles, unstable 60 FPS. It had it all, and I could not wait to try the game out for myself. And now that I have completed Murder House twice, and have unlocked all the trophies, I think I'm finally ready to give you guys my honest thoughts on this game. But not until you motherfuckers smash that subscribe button. Am I right? Am I right? Please subscribe, they're going to take my fucking kids from me. From the first second I booted up Murder House, I could tell I was in for something special. The whole game is obviously a massive homage to early survival horror games like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, as well as slasher movies from the 70s and 80s like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween. The game's menus are presented on a video cassette box, and there are even different filters that allow the game to look like something from the PS1 era. Very impressive. If you grew up during the 80s and you know what this piece of shit is, there is a good chance that Murder House's aesthetic will be right up your alley. I simply can't think of another indie game that nails its presentation as well as this game does. But enough about Murder House's aesthetic. It's time to start talking about the game itself. Murder House's story begins in 1985. A young boy named Justin is about to have his photo taken with the Easter Bunny at the local mall.
Smile, kid. Say cheese.
A few hours after the picture is taken, however, Justin awakens in a photo booth. The mall is now closed, and there doesn't seem to be a single person around. Desperate to find a way out, Justin begins to explore the mall. Along the way, he finds several flyers containing images of children that have previously gone missing in the mall. Justin catches a glimpse of someone familiar while exploring, and decides to follow him. This turns out to be a massive mistake. So it appears that the Easter Bunny is back for more than a simple photo, and Justin needs to find somewhere to hide quickly. He finds a bathroom and hides in one of the stalls until the Easter Bunny has left the area. Never thought I'd have to write that sentence in my life. Once it is safe, Justin leaves the bathroom and continues to explore the rest of the mall. This next area introduces the player to the kind of puzzles they'll be solving throughout the game. They are pretty simplistic for the most part, usually requiring you to remember a short passcode and stuff like that. If you have ever played a Resident Evil game before, you will know exactly what to expect. After much searching, Justin finally finds another human being, and it is a face many of you will instantly recognize.
Whoa, calm down. How did you get in here?
That's right, it's famed YouTuber, Jack the Septic Guy? I think that's his name? Anyways, Jack tells Justin that he is perfectly safe and that he will go look for the Easter Bunny himself. However, once a few minutes have passed, it becomes very clear that Jack probably isn't going to be coming back, and on top of that, the power to the area has been cut, so Justin decides to hide under a desk until it is safe for him to leave. Yeah, I really like this prologue. It's spooky, well paced, and introduces the player to many of the mechanics that will be used throughout the game. I also have to praise the outstanding sound design used during this entire sequence. The mall area initially uses this soothing, almost dreamlike piece of music. Before it quickly changes to one of the most uncomfortable, anxiety-inducing things I have ever heard in my life. Murder House's composer was clearly inspired by the works of Akira Yamaoka, and he did a fantastic job overall. The soundtrack really adds to the eeriness of the game, and there were times when I almost wanted to stop playing the game entirely, because its atmosphere was almost too suffocating. Anyways, the game's story then fast forwards to the year 1988. A TV news crew arrive at an old, run-down house in the middle of the woods. This house apparently used to belong to a man named Anthony Smith, who was also known as the Easter Ripper, basically the guy we were hiding from at the beginning of the game. Anthony would kidnap children, bring them to this house, torture them, and then finally kill them. Nearly a dozen children were murdered in this house, so the local news team thought it would be a great idea to do a news story on the place. We play as a young woman named Emma for the remainder of the game, and our first task is to find a way inside the house, since the place is locked up tight. Emma finds a way to enter the house through a basement window and unlocks the front door so that the rest of the news team can enter. Once the news crew has set up their equipment in the house, they realise that there is no power and task you with fixing the situation. It's actually surprising how slow the first half of this chapter is. Instead of hiding from a crazed man in a bunny costume, you'll instead spend a lot of time casually exploring the house, finding items and solving basic puzzles. You really aren't in any danger during this time either, so there is no need to waste your limited saves when there's no threat of a game over. Exploring the house is still genuinely enjoyable, and some of the puzzles are quite clever and fun to solve, but without any enemies to deal with, the pacing can feel a bit off at times. Thankfully, once the Easter Ripper does appear, things really do get cranked up to 11.
Help me! There's somebody else in here!
I could tell it was dead straight off.
Similar to games like Resident Evil 3 and Alien Isolation, the Easter Ripper is a pursuer enemy who will constantly follow you throughout the house. You can't kill him, and attacking him will simply cause him to leave the area for a short period of time. I can't adequately convey how much this guy fucking terrified me the first time I played Murder House. I mean, yeah, he is just a guy in an Easter Bunny costume, but I think it's widely accepted at this point that the Easter Bunny is the most terrifying of the holiday mascots.
Eddie.
That's not the Easter Bunny! That's not the Easter Bunny! Oh my god!
If you are low on ammunition or health, it is also possible to hide from the Easter Ripper, using wardrobes or cabinets littered around the house. The thing is, you just never know when it is safe to leave these hiding spots. You could hear the Ripper leave the room, but once you leave the cabinet, you just... Ah! I'm sorry, Mr. Bunny, sir, but do I have to keep playing your game for much longer? It's really scaring me. Fine.
You sure do drive a hard bargain.
Once the Easter Ripper appears, puzzle solving also becomes a lot more frustrating, as you won't have a lot of time to solve a conundrum before the rabbit is back chasing you again. As mentioned earlier, it is possible to save your game in Murder House, but doing so requires you to find pencils that you then use to record your progress, and these pencils are in short supply throughout the house, so it is entirely possible to die and have to replay a good half hour of the game because you were trying to hang on to your few remaining saves. As much as I love the ink ribbon system from Resident Evil, putting it in a modern game with no option to turn it off just seems crazy to me. Apart from that, my only other real complaint with this game is its length. The game retails for about $10 in the US, which is a fair price, but I think it's important that I inform you all that this is a really short game, as in, there is a trophy for completing the game in under 25 minutes and it's not even that difficult to obtain short. There aren't any alternative endings or unlockable costumes either. It really is a one and done experience. It's a genuinely brilliant experience while it lasts. It's just a shame it doesn't last that long. So overall, would I recommend Murder House? Absolutely. Assuming you know what you are getting into and are okay with how short the experience is, there is a lot to love in this game. Everything from its perfectly recreated 1970s aesthetic to its unnerving soundtrack is an absolute delight to experience. It is admittedly a very short game, but I was constantly on edge throughout, and best of all, it's cheap. Murder House is the perfect game to while away a few hours with this Halloween. Okay, so I played your fucking game. Can I go now?
Not yet, Ben. There's still one more game I need you to play.
What? No. What game? What game could it... No. Oh, you must be kidding me. Oh, you must be fucking kidding me. Here I am, in this tiny room, trying everything I can to extinguish this gloom. Every day just fucking bleeds into the next. When does it end? When can I rest? Most days I feel lonely, some days I feel depressed. I should really talk to someone and get this shit off my chest. I want to keep fighting, I want to persist, but sometimes I struggle to see more to life than this. The Cat Lady is a 2D point-and-click horror adventure game developed by Harvester Games and released in 2012 for PC. The Cat Lady is the second title in a trilogy of video games known as the Devil Came True Here trilogy. Characters from Harvester's previous game, Downfall, also make an appearance in The Cat Lady, although you don't have to have played that game to understand this one. They are entirely different stories for the most part. The Cat Lady was well received by critics upon its initial release, with praise mostly being directed towards its story and characters. However, some critics thought the game had a little bit too much backtracking, and some also had issues with the game's controls. Over time, the game would amass a massive cult following, with many people claiming The Cat Lady to be easily one of the greatest games ever made. I would also share that sentiment. There are very few issues I have with The Cat Lady. It's a fucking masterpiece as far as I'm concerned, and its story is still one of the most unforgettable and heartbreaking tales ever written for a video game. However, I also have to clarify that this game won't be for everyone, as it covers very intense subject matter, like suicide, depression, murder, infanticide, cancer, and also the game has a metric shit ton of blood and gore. The Cat Lady is one of the few 18+ rated games where I'm like, yeah, you probably shouldn't play this if you're not an adult. It feels like a game made by adults for adults, which is very rare to see in this medium. To me, I liken The Cat Lady to something like Requiem for a Dream, in that they are both really powerful and memorable experiences that will stay with me for the rest of my life. They are also both really fucking funny. If you have ever suffered from depression or suicidal thoughts, then The Cat Lady will probably resonate with you a great deal, and might even become one of your favourite games of all time. I personally learned so much about the different ways people deal with depression from playing this game. The same way I learned so much about what women want in a man from watching Andrew Tate videos.
To him. Neither will any other female. So for women to come along and pretend they give a about the fact that most men are basically invisible.
Be mentally disabled. In The Cat Lady, you play as a middle-aged woman named Susan Ashworth. At the beginning of the game, Susan is in a very bad place mentally and has decided that taking her own life is the only way to end her suffering.
Some would say it's a lonely life, and I guess that's true, but I don't like people's company. Not lately, anyway. I only trust my cats these days, and I will miss them dearly, but they will understand, like they always have. Teacup stays with me till the end. He watches me, as if he knew. Because earlier tonight, I swallowed a whole bunch of pills. They're legal, of course, prescribed by my doctor for my sleeping problems. But I've taken 34 of them, all I could find in the cupboard, and now the room around me spins in a blurry tango as my heart slows down.
I found this opening cutscene to be very effective at drawing me into this world. Despite not knowing a single thing about Susan by this point in the story, I still wanted to know what drove her to overdose on sleeping pills. What drove her to want to end it all? Well, even though Susan longs for death, she does not get her wish. We both have that in common, I guess. Instead, she awakens in a beautiful field with no idea of how she got there. She begins to explore the area and realizes that something is very wrong with this place. She encounters some disturbing imagery and even finds her dead body hanging from a tree. It almost feels like this place is trying to mentally torture Susan. Almost like she's in purgatory or something, but she just hasn't realized it yet. After solving some simplistic puzzles, Susan finds a key that unlocks a nearby gate. In the next area, Susan meets an old lady known as the Queen of Maggots.
Welcome to my house, Susan Ashworth. I have been waiting for you, my dear. I knew you would turn up one fine day like this.
Who are you?
I have so many names, it's hard to pick one. But I'm curious, who do you think I am?
If there is one complaint I have with the cat lady, it's that sometimes conversations can drag on for fucking ages. And this first conversation with the Queen of Maggots is one of the worst offenders in that regard. These two end up speaking to each other for over 15 minutes, and so little of what they talk about is even relevant to the main plot. Eventually, however, the Queen of Maggots gets to the point and reveals why Susan was brought to this place.
I'll need you to go back and face 5 people. They're not ordinary people, they're very special. Just like you, only in a slightly different way.
So even though Susan still wants to die, the Queen of Maggots refuses to let her rest until she completes an important task for her. She wants Susan to return to the real world and kill 5 people for her. The Queen of Maggots refers to these 5 people as parasites, basically the worst of the worst. Murderers, rapists, cannibals, and so on. Susan will remain immortal until she successfully kills these 5 people. So even if she is killed in the real world, she will simply come back to life a short time later. To be honest, I still don't understand why the Queen of Maggots chooses Susan for this task. Susan isn't a killer, and she certainly isn't the most physically fit person out there either. But whatever, I guess. At first, Susan refuses to kill the parasites, and begs the woman to just let her die instead. The Queen of Maggots refuses, and instead shows Susan the kind of torment she'll have to endure if she doesn't agree to her terms.
Yes, it's you, Susan. Come closer. Say hello.
I don't want to look at it. Haven't I had enough yet? That body in the ambulance. Then the forest. But this is exactly what I was trying to run away from.
Not seeing any other choice, Susan reluctantly agrees to do the Queen's bidding. Before Susan can leave this place and return to the real world, however, she needs to make a sacrifice of soul and a sacrifice of blood. Susan is told that to perform a sacrifice of soul, all she needs to do is to blow out one of the candles on the table. Susan, in her naivety, doesn't realize that blowing out one of these candles will also essentially snuff out a human life in the real world. So she goes ahead and blows out the candle without much thought.
They left me no choice, Alice. Maybe one day you'll forgive me.
See how easy that was?
I love how dark this game's sense of humour can be at times. When tackling heavy topics like suicide and depression, it's important to never go too over the top with dark jokes and humour, and thankfully the cat lady gets the balance just right in my opinion. Susan will also need to make a sacrifice of blood before she is able to leave this place. But thankfully, the Queen of Maggots informed Susan that she will only need to shed a few drops of blood in order to leave. So how bad could it really be? I don't know about you, but I think that's a pretty fucking memorable way to reveal a game's title card. The game then cuts to Susan talking to a therapist about various aspects of her life. However, before they are able to tackle any difficult topics, the game cuts again to show Susan lying in a hospital bed, in what is apparently the real world. It seems that the Queen of Maggots was correct, and Susan did not end up dying from her apparent overdose. Susan is greeted by Liz, a very kind and talkative nurse. Even though Susan is currently in no condition to speak, Liz still feels comfortable opening up to her about very personal aspects of her life, her job, her friends, and even her ex-boyfriend. Liz also informs Susan that a woman claiming to be her daughter entered her apartment and found her lying unconscious on the floor. She then called an ambulance, which is the only reason Susan is still alive. Liz also warns Susan about a doctor working in the hospital named Dr. X, who just so happens to be the psychiatrist Susan was talking to at the beginning of the chapter. Apparently, Dr. X likes to flirt with the female staff and patients at the hospital, and he might have even ended up having an affair with a woman at the hospital, who was subsequently never seen again. Once Susan and Liz have finished their conversation, the game once again cuts back to Susan talking with Dr. X. The doctor wants Susan to open up about her childhood, as he feels it's pivotal to discovering why Susan decided to take her own life. The doctor starts by asking Susan what her relationship with her father was like. If you want, you can answer these questions as if they are being asked directly to you, which is what I ended up doing. Hey, I thought it would be like getting a free therapy session, and I need all the free therapy I can get, you know? You can answer the doctor's questions however you like, and there won't be any ramifications for it. But it is interesting to replay this section and answer differently each time, to hear the doctor's ruminations on why Susan's life went in the direction it did. Once Susan has answered some of the doctor's questions, the game randomly cuts back to Susan's hospital bed. The cat lady's story often likes to jump back and forth between the past and the present, which could potentially lead to some players feeling disoriented and confused about what is really going on. I think this was a deliberate choice by the developers, however, to make you feel unsure about what is reality and what is just a figment of Susan's imagination. Regardless, we finally have full control of Susan again, and she is ready to get the hell out of this hospital. Unfortunately, Susan is stopped by some guards on the way out, and is told that she will need a discharge letter before she is able to leave the hospital. Getting that discharge letter will require Susan to solve some very devious puzzles, so I guess I should take a moment to talk about the Cat Lady's gameplay and puzzle design. The Cat Lady's game design will feel instantly recognizable to anyone who has ever played a point-and-click adventure game before, but there are some subtle differences that separate the Cat Lady from many of its contemporaries. For example, the entire game is played using a keyboard. You can't use a mouse to move Susan about or interact with objects. I can't really understand the developers' logic behind forcing everyone to play the game solely with a keyboard. I mean, don't get me wrong, playing the game in this way isn't horrible, but it almost definitely would have been a lot more comfortable with a mouse. The game is also played entirely from a 2D perspective. You can only move Susan to the left or right, and she is unable to move towards or away from the camera. This isn't as big a deal as some people might lead you to believe, however. Susan can still interact with objects in the background or foreground, so it still plays pretty similarly to any other classic point-and-click adventure game. Most of the time you'll be solving puzzles by picking up items in the environment and using them where necessary. Although some puzzles are a lot more clever than that and require a bit more problem solving from the player. Let me use this hospital section as an example. This will be the only area where I outright spoil some of the game's puzzles, so you needn't worry about me spoiling any late game puzzles in this video. Although if you would still rather not know the solution to any of the game's puzzles, you may skip ahead to this timestamp. So the first thing you'll need to do to get your hands on that discharge letter is to talk to this patient named Anne Burton. Anne is a little...
Hi, are you alright? Can we talk for a minute?
I can't talk. Please, just leave me alone.
Oh, I mean you no harm. I'm trapped here, just like you.
Trapped? I don't know. It's just so hard to think without it.
Yeah. But on the plus side, this means she can probably be manipulated quite easily. Susan says that she is good friends with Anne's mother, but Anne isn't buying it and asks Susan to tell her what her mother's name is. We obviously can't answer her right now since we don't yet know the mother's name, so next what you have to do is go to the bathroom and ring the emergency bell. This will get the attention of a nurse, who will give Susan a drug that causes her to fall asleep. However, while asleep, Susan will enter a more nightmarish version of the hospital. By entering the bathroom in this version of the hospital, you will find 2 mirrors with a few letters scrawled on them. But wait, these letters don't make any sense by themselves. That is, until you return to the normal world and run the hot tap in the bathroom sink for a few minutes, which reveals the final letters needed to spell out Anne's mother's name. Pretty smart, eh? And that is actually one of the game's easier puzzles. Anyways, after a lot of work and effort, Susan finally gets her hands on the discharge letter and Anne's name band, which will allow her to finally leave the hospital. However, on her way out, she is stopped by Dr. X, who tells Susan that she can't leave until they have had a proper chat about everything that has happened so far. He needs to make sure that Susan won't attempt to take her own life again. Susan reluctantly agrees, and the next morning she meets Dr. X for her therapy session. We are now caught up on everything that happened before Susan met Dr. X, so there won't be any more time jumps for the rest of the chapter. This next scene really allows us to get to know Susan a lot more, which is important in helping us empathize with her and understand why she is currently so depressed. The doctor begins to ask Susan some pretty personal questions, like whether she is currently living alone and whether she will try to commit suicide again. Susan has no problem answering most of these questions, but as soon as the doctor brings up her husband Eric, she refuses to talk about him.
Finally, I'd like you to tell me about Eric.
Eric?
Yes, your husband. I believe this might be important. What can you tell me about your relationship? What had happened between you two?
It's getting late. Can we talk about it some other time?
Fine. I suppose you've opened enough for one day.
Before the doctor will allow Susan to leave, he has to ask her one more question regarding what apparently happened the previous night. We then get a flashback sequence where Liz tells Susan that they are in great danger and that they must leave the hospital as soon as possible. Susan and Liz make it to an elevator, but instead of taking it to the first floor, Liz instead takes it to the rooftop.
What are we doing on the roof? Liz! What the hell are you doing? And why is there blood on your clothes? Liz!
It's quicker than the stairs. And besides, all the doors are locked anyway. This is the only way out of here. The only escape. Let's both jump. It won't hurt, you'll see.
So it appears that Liz has decided to take her own life. Although maybe by showing that you care about her, you can potentially convince her not to jump. I'm going to let this scene play out as it's pretty powerful stuff.
Did I tell you about my flatmate? Did I tell you what one of them does for a living? If you really listened, you will remember this one.
She's a stripper.
Yes. Or at least that's what I think she is. You've listened. I just wish other people did.
I'm sure they do. It can't be that bad.
What do you know? Why do you care anyway?
I don't want you to make the same mistake I did.
I thought you of all people knew how it feels. When you're trapped and you can't trust anyone.
Look, I'm sure there must be someone who cares about you.
My colleagues don't care. My family don't care. Even my fucking boyfriend never cared. He said he needed to go find himself. Did I tell you when he broke up with me?
On Valentine's Day.
Yes. Valentine's Day. You've got this one right. But it's not enough. Don't feel responsible. You didn't cause me this pain. This suffering. I have to do this to be free again. Jump with me, Susan. Do it while you still can.
No!
So regardless of whether you were able to answer Liz's questions correctly, she will still end up jumping. She apparently had endured more suffering than she could handle and decided to end it all. It is a genuinely sad moment, especially when you consider how friendly and nice Liz had been to Susan from the beginning. Once Susan has finished recounting the story to the doctor, he allows her to leave. Or does he?
The door is locked?
I plan ahead, Susan. I had a feeling in my gut, and my gut's never wrong. I feel like I really got to know you, though. I'm very sorry you've had such a difficult life. I like your green eyes and your sleek cheekbones. You're a clever girl, Susan, but the sadness has poisoned you for too long. There is no coming back from it. For what it's worth, I would have let you go if it wasn't for Liz.
Susan awakens in a strange room where she is greeted by a mysterious voice who has a riddle he wants her to solve. Two dolls then appear alongside two doors. Behind one of the doors is a prize for Susan, something she has apparently always wanted. To make Susan's choice a little easier, she can ask one of the dolls a single question. The catch is that one of the dolls always tells the truth and the other always lies. To be perfectly honest, I wasn't smart enough to figure this one out, so I didn't end up picking the correct door. However, don't worry, regardless of which door you choose, you will still be able to continue the story just fine. There are no game overs in The Cat Lady. In the next room, Susan is forced to snuff out another life before she is able to come back to life.
You treacherous, dirty bastard. I opened my heart to you, and you stabbed me to death in cold blood. You'll pay for this. I swear you will.
Susan awakens in a strange room surrounded by dead bodies, who appear to be the Doctor's previous victims. Susan has no idea where she is, but from all the gruesome imagery on display, it appears that she has found herself in the Doctor's fucked up hidden lair. Susan finds the Doctor torturing another woman, and this scene is just kinda ridiculous in all the worst ways.
I don't need eyes to enjoy your fear. Scream louder, little bitch. Scream your lungs out. Louder, I said. Yes, this is by far my favorite of songs. Would you like me to dance for you? Unlike you, I know all art needs to be appreciated. Your scream is like a poem without words.
So you are telling me that this Doctor, who is clearly very intelligent and empathetic towards his patients, becomes this sick, murderous psychopath at night? Yeah, I don't buy it. Unfortunately, for as much as the Cat Lady gets right, its villains just come across as cartoon characters, which makes it impossible to take them seriously. Anyways, before Susan can kill the Doctor, she needs to find a weapon, so she begins searching the area for parts that she can use to craft something deadly. While doing so, however, Susan comes across the dead body of Liz. It appears that the poor girl did not jump off the roof to her death like we all thought. Instead, it looks like she was yet another one of the Doctor's victims. So does that mean that when Liz appeared on the roof, she was a ghost or something? It's impossible to know for sure, and the game never outright gives you an answer, and I think I prefer it that way. I like that some plot elements are deliberately left open for interpretation, as it makes the game a lot more interesting to discuss with people online. Anyways, once Susan has found all the parts she needs, she crafts a weapon at a workbench, and then returns to the Doctor. I love the way you are allowed to choose the final words the Doctor hears before he dies. This is objectively the correct choice, by the way.
Do you believe in karma, Doc?
Susan frees the woman and then returns home to her apartment. Thus ends Chapter 2. Amazingly, as great as that chapter was, the game only gets better from here on out. Chapter 3 begins with Susan arriving home and deciding that she needs a shower, which I learnt the hard way is what you should do immediately when your clothes are dripping in blood. However, just as Susan is about to step into the shower, the power goes out in her apartment. She now needs to find her wallet in order to put money in the electric meter. This next section is kinda bullshit from a gameplay perspective, but it is phenomenal at demonstrating how overwhelming life can be for someone suffering from depression or anxiety. So basically, during this section of the game, there will be 2 meters on screen. The red meter is essentially Susan's anxiety level. When the red bar is full, Susan will have an anxiety attack and will end up crying herself to sleep. So basically like every Saturday night for me. The green bar, however, represents Susan's happiness level. When the green bar is full, Susan will... Well, I don't know, as I've never managed to fill the green bar entirely. You see, the problem with this section is that it's entirely based on trial and error. There is simply no way you will be able to keep Susan from getting anxious on your first playthrough. Every single thing upsets this woman. She sees her monthly bills on the table, her anxiety levels rise. She sees a shadow, her anxiety levels rise. Hell, even when she finds out her milk is out of date, her anxiety levels rise. But I also think that anyone who has ever suffered from anxiety or depression will empathize a great deal with Susan in this chapter. I mean, fuck, even I get anxious every time I need to wash my car. Oh, Jesus Christ, there's so much this time. Oh, fuck, not now. Once Susan has had her shower and cup of coffee, she decides to play her piano, as the sound of music usually draws any nearby cats to her apartment.
Come inside, my darlings. I've missed you.
In all honesty, this scene is kinda heartbreaking. This is the first point in the game where you really get a sense for how completely alone Susan truly is.
You never eat my food, Teacup. Already had your dinner, have you? No, I get it. I know. You're a good friend. The best friend I have, really. The only friend in the whole fucking world. You come over to keep me company and want nothing in return.
Anyways, regardless of what gauge gets filled first, this chapter ends with Susan falling asleep. The next morning, she awakens to the sound of someone knocking on her door.
Hello, Miss Ashworth. How are you? Are you feeling better?
Do I know you?
Of course. You don't remember me. My name is Mitzi Hunt. We met a few days ago. You were out cold at the time. Those pills you had worked real good. You probably had one too many, mind you.
So this woman's name is Mitzi, and she had shown up to inquire about the room Susan had available to let, but instead found her lying unconscious on the floor. She immediately called the ambulance and told them that she was Susan's daughter, so that she wouldn't have to answer a lot of questions. Susan is initially reluctant to let this strange woman be her lodger, but eventually she agrees, as she could do with some extra money. Susan shows Mitzi the spare bedroom, and despite it looking like a literal garbage heap, Mitzi still agrees to take the room.
I'll move some stuff to the side if that's okay with you, but most of it I can use. All I really need is a bed to sleep and a roof over my head to calm me from that rain, and a power outlet so I can charge my laptop. Oh, and someone to watch too. You got a shower, right? I'm dying for a shower.
It's starting to feel like this woman might have ulterior motives for wanting to rent this room, and a few moments later, we learn some devastating information about her.
Room's great. So what do you say, Miss Ashworth? I hope you're not going to change your mind about this. Miss Ashworth? What happened? Are you all right?
You're going to die.
I know. Yeah. I know. How did you know, Miss Ashworth? Are you some sort of a psychic? Do you possess some kind of supernatural mind-reading abilities? Or is it just so fucking obvious?
What do you mean? I don't know how you're going to die, but call it a hunch if you like.
It's cool. A hunch. Well, I do. I know exactly. It's already started, as a matter of fact. Do you want to see? I'll show you. Here, Miss Ashworth. Take a good look, because I'm not going to do it again.
Susan and Mitzi soon become good friends, and it's sweet, but also kinda heartbreaking that these two broken, lonely people that have finally found each other will soon be separated due to Mitzi's cancer. While I do find some of the cat lady's dialogue to occasionally be kinda drawn out or cheesy, when it's good, it's really fucking good, and is some of the most well written dialogue I've ever seen in a game.
What kind of cancer is it? Do you mind me asking?
brain tumor. Her name is glioblastoma.
Huh.
Yep, they're all girls, the way I imagine it. Just look at their names. Lymphoma, melanoma, myeloma, leukemia, sarcoma. Each of them a fucking goddess of death. Beautiful and ruthless.
You might just be right about that, Mitzi. I used to be a nurse. I know a few things about cancer. And I know glioblastoma. She's a real bitch.
Yeah, and yet she gets to be the prom queen before night ends, while I disappear down the back exit.
How long?
They said I had a year. But that was 6 months ago, so... yeah. Not awfully long.
Mitzi finally reveals the real reason she wants to rent Susan's spare room. So it turns out that Mitzi had a boyfriend who ended up taking his own life after he was essentially talked into doing it by an online forum user who goes by the username The Eye of Adam. Mitzi has managed to track this guy down, and it turns out that he lives in Susan's apartment building. So before she dies, Mitzi just wants to talk with this Eye of Adam to get answers as to why he convinced her boyfriend to take his own life. Mitzi is genuinely one of my favourite characters in any video game I've played. Despite her having an absolutely horrific backstory, she stays upbeat and cheerful in nearly every scene she is in.
I'm not sure I get it. What's the point of that? What did you say it was called again?
For the third time. Social network. Why is it so difficult to remember?
I just find the whole idea really stupid. Why would I want to tell people that I'm having a shit day?
So maybe you would feel better for sharing it with your friends.
But I don't have any friends.
No, you wouldn't with this attitude.
You, on the other hand, seem to have 274 of them? How is that even possible?
Well, what can I say? I'm very likable.
It's impossible not to like her. But despite how optimistic Mitzi usually is, every now and then she will come out with something that is just so fucking heartbreaking that there were a few times that I came close to tears.
Mrs. A, what does depression feel like?
Well, it feels like all I want is to die, but I have to live.
That's funny. Most of the time I feel like I want to live, but I have to die.
Anyways, getting back to the story, Susan and Mitzi hear cats wailing in the street one night for seemingly no reason. Susan decides to investigate the noise and meets a strange man outside her apartment, who was apparently called to the building to take care of the cat problem.
Bloody fog. Can't see a thing. Someone could be getting murdered 2 feet away, and not a soul would notice.
What do you want?
I'm just here on a job, sweetheart. Nothing more. I had a call, you see. There's a cat problem. And apparently, some crazy cat lady keeps making it worse for everyone. A crazy cat lady called Susan, I was told. Now, you ain't gonna like it, sweetheart, but I'm taking you for a ride.
Susan awakens sometime later strapped to a table, with her kidnapper looming over her. Honestly, as creepy and sadistic as this guy appears, he does at least appear to have a soft spot when it comes to animals. I mean, he even offers to take care of Susan's cat.
Well, don't you worry, my sweetest. I know a thing or two about pussycats. I can help. What do you say? Shall I take a good look at this pussy of yours?
Uh-huh. It means what? The kidnapper's wife, I guess, suddenly appears and accuses her husband of flirting with Susan.
Who's this?
Did you play with this little bitch behind my back? 'Cause if you did, I swear to God.
So to stop such an event from reoccurring, the woman pours bleach onto Susan's face to disfigure her.
You give me no choice. I can't risk losing him. I have to make sure he won't be attracted to you anymore. You won't need these eyes and this face much longer anyway.
Hey there, gorgeous. I see my old lady brought the bleach again. What a shame. I really liked your eyes. It could have been a start of something very exciting for us, if you know what I mean. She does that every single time. What do they call it? Trust issues, that's it. Well, never mind. Plenty more fish in the sea. I'm not too fussy, but even I have some standards. Ain't gonna touch a bird like you, I gotta be honest, girl. You look like shit. But I wouldn't want you to think I'm not a kind man. Plenty of time until dinner, and you're in pain, so I've brought something to end your suffering. Think of it as an option. I've got this gun here. It's one of my favourites. So I'll just leave it for you here. Feel free to use it. That bullet's meant for you anyway. I'd better go now. We won't want to get caught red-handed again, would we? You naughty minx. What was that? You can't reach it? Well, what did you expect? Life's a real fucker sometimes.
The Cat Lady is really good at portraying its villains as just the most vile pieces of shit on the planet. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, they're so over the fucking top that it's practically impossible to take any of them seriously. But I'd be lying if I said that it didn't feel really good killing these cons. So Susan is still currently strapped to the table, meaning that it's impossible for her to reach the gun. Thankfully, one of Susan's cats appears and manages to snatch the key that unlocks Susan's restraints. Now that Susan is free, she can finally grab the gun, but since she has been completely blinded by the bleach, the only thing she can think to do with the weapon is use it to take her own life. It's kind of fucked up that Susan is essentially being forced to take her own life in this situation, especially after she had already failed to commit suicide just a few days prior. But at least she knows this time that it won't be permanent.
I'm sorry, Mitzi. I have to break my promise.
So as to be expected, Susan comes back to life shortly after pulling the trigger, and is now hungry for revenge. This next section of the game is easily one of my favourites. You are in this large mansion trying to find a way to escape, and the whole time 2 crazed serial killers are lurking nearby. Even though you can't permanently die in the Cat Lady, I still found this section very unnerving, especially when the old lady would appear out of nowhere and kill you in seconds. Since Susan has no weapon to kill these parasites with, she decides to make her own, and searches the house for various chemicals she can use to create a poisonous gas that will kill anyone in the immediate vicinity. Once she has all the necessary ingredients, she pours them into a bucket, puts on a gas mask, and enjoys the show. This scene is just so badass. Susan has gone from being the hunted to the hunter. You feel invincible while searching the house for the other crazy psychopath, and once you find her, it's the most cathartic feeling in the world getting to pull that trigger. An incredible way to finish off a truly brilliant chapter. And honestly, that's it. I don't want to spoil any more of the game in this video. The Cat Lady is a truly special game and deserves to be experienced properly. A dumb guy on YouTube with a horrendous Irish accent should not be the one to spoil this story for you. The Cat Lady is usually dirt cheap on Steam and GOG, and it's worth every cent. If any part of this review has piqued your interest in the game, then I implore you to give it a try. The Cat Lady is not a perfect game by any means, but it's a game that will stay with you for a lifetime, and if you have ever experienced depressing or suicidal thoughts, then this game will probably speak to you more than any other piece of media out there. It truly is an experience unlike no other. A new old school survival horror game. This looks pretty good. I think I'm going to buy this. Sure, what's the worst that could happen?
Well, that was fucking dreadful.
Dawn of Fear is a survival horror game developed by Dawn of Fear was released in February 2020 for the PS4. It received very negative reviews from critics and is currently one of the lowest scoring games on PS4. Going in, I expected very little from Dawn of Fear. In fact, I only purchased the game in the first place because I'm a huge fan of the early Resident Evil and Silent Hill games. Even though I still enjoy a lot of the horror games that have been released in the last decade, I will always have a soft spot for the fixed camera perspectives and tank controls of 90s survival horror games. And from looking at screenshots of the game, it certainly seems like the developers of Dawn of Fear also have a lot of love for that period of gaming. However, after completing Dawn of Fear, I think it's safe to say that while there was still clearly a lot of love and effort poured into this game, the finished product still leaves an awful lot to be desired. Dawn of Fear begins with one of the most beautiful, poignant, and thought-provoking cutscenes I've ever seen in a game. A telephone rings. Who's this? Hi Alex, it's Ethan. Hi, how is Jessica? Alex, I'm sorry, it's very hard to say, but Jessica is dead. She couldn't bear it and she committed suicide. Alex, are you still there? Are you okay? Yes, I'm... Okay, hang on a second. What the hell is going on right now? This cutscene is such a mess. Who are any of these people? Who are we playing as in this game? Alex? Or is it Ethan we're playing as? Who is Jessica? Actually, never mind that. Who the fuck are John and Max? And where is the voice acting? This has got to be one of the messiest openings to a video game I've ever seen. You'd think from reading all of this that Dawn of Fear has a really complex premise, but it's actually incredibly basic. Basically, we play as Alex, this bloke here, and he's returning home to sort out some important business after his mother commits suicide. That's it. Basically, all of this could have been shortened down to this. Anyways, shortly after arriving at the house, we are given control of Alex and are free to explore the area. And I have to say, these first 5 minutes of the game were pretty great. Memories of Resident Evil 1 instantly came flooding back to me as I began exploring the house. A few minutes later, I run into my first enemy. Unfortunately, I don't currently have any weapons to defend myself with, so I backtrack to the main hall. Jesus Christ! Oh, he dropped a gun. That's useful. So I go back to the room with the zombie and give him a piece of my mind, and pick up a key. If this is all sounding very familiar to you right now, well it should. This opening is almost a note-for-note recreation of Resident Evil 1's opening. In fact, at times, Dawn of Fear feels more like a remake of the original Resident Evil than its own game. A terrible remake of the original Resident Evil, but a remake nonetheless. The game does have some of its own ideas, of course, but unfortunately, none of them are implemented in a satisfying way. For example, the inventory system. Pausing Dawn of Fear will open Alex's journal. From here, you can read notes, equip weapons, and use items. The main problem with the journal is that it takes a lifetime to navigate. If you want to do something as simple as using a first aid kit to heal yourself, you need to first open your journal, navigate to the actual page the first aid kit is located on, and then select it. It's far more cumbersome than it needs to be. The journal also indicates Alex's current health level, and I hate it so much. So obviously, whenever Alex takes damage from enemies, he loses health, but he doesn't show his current health level in-game like Resident Evil characters do. He won't limp or have any visible wounds on him when he's injured. The only way to tell how close Alex is to dying is by checking how bloody his journal is. I'm not fucking kidding. So a lot of the time it's very easy to die because you were simply unsure about how injured Alex currently was. It's a terrible system. You'll spend a lot of your time playing Dawn of Fear, solving puzzles and looking for keys to unlock new areas. And honestly, this aspect of the gameplay is very enjoyable. Level design is excellent for the most part. There are plenty of areas to explore, and they all connect to each other in a believable way. Well, most of the time. Sometimes you'll open a door in the house, only to suddenly find yourself in an area that looks like a museum. It's incredibly strange when it happens, but it's a rare enough occurrence. Puzzles are probably the most enjoyable part of the game. Many of them are well designed and will probably have you stumped for a few moments at the very least. Some of them aren't nearly as smart as they initially seem, however, with this statue puzzle being laughably easy once you figure out what the game is asking of you. So obviously, when you're not busy solving puzzles or exploring the house, you'll be coming face to face with many of the beasts that have decided to call this place home. As in most survival horror games, enemies can be deadly in Dawn of Fear, with many of them being able to kill you in 1 or 2 attacks. Ammo is scarce, so killing all enemies isn't really an option. Never mind that. Running away is usually your best option. Thankfully, however, the AI in Dawn of Fear is so awful that most of the time, running away isn't much of a problem anyway. There also isn't a huge amount of variety in the kind of monsters you'll be running into. There are really only 3 types of creatures you'll encounter in the game, apart from the boss fights, of course. Boss fights are some of the most enjoyable combat encounters in the game, because there's an element of puzzle solving added to them. I mean, don't get me wrong, these fights aren't amazing by any stretch of the imagination, but they do break up the gameplay nicely. Despite how well designed a lot of the monsters are in Dawn of Fear, I'd be hesitant to call the game scary. I'd struggle to think of a single moment that caused me to jump out of my seat. I can tell the developers were really trying to create something spooky and atmospheric with this game, but unfortunately they weren't quite able to pull it off. The whole game just comes across as silly and childish, and I think a big reason for this is the awful mistranslated script. Brian, is that you? Hello, my little sir. We were waiting for your visit. At least. Tell me, Brian, what's happening here? What's all this nightmare? My blood? Abby, you are crazy. All of you are driving crazy. I have to get out of here. Even though I didn't expect Dawn of Fear's narrative to be on the same level as something like Silent Hill 2, I was still shocked by how little story there is here. Nothing interesting happens during the 3 hours it takes to beat Dawn of Fear, and any twists the story may have, you will see coming a mile away. A bigger issue with the game's story, however, is the complete lack of any voice acting in the cutscenes. It's very hard to care about any of these characters when they're completely silent for the entirety of the game. I can't for the life of me understand how a game like this gets released in 2020 without voice acting. I understand that the development team might not have been able to afford professional voice actors, but it's not that difficult or expensive today to find talented people willing to add their voice to your video game. But you know what? I can get over the poor story and lack of voice acting if the gameplay is enjoyable, and I do think Dawn of Fear can be a very enjoyable game to play at times. However, any enjoyment you might occasionally get out of the game is usually quickly followed by a game-breaking bug that just makes you want to stop playing the game entirely. Yeah, no fucking shit. Worse still is that the game can occasionally just crash for no reason, forcing you to boot the game back up. This wouldn't be such a big deal if not for the fact that Dawn of Fear doesn't feature an autosave feature, and instead requires you to use candles you find around the house to save. If you run out of candles to light, well, I guess you aren't going to be saving the fucking game anymore, are you? I'm usually a fan of limited saves in games, but only if the game in question isn't a buggy piece of shit, and Dawn of Fear isn't exactly Resident Evil 2 Remake in that department. Dawn of Fear isn't an especially long game, with my first playthrough taking just over 3 hours to complete. However, much of that time was spent wandering about, not knowing where the hell to go next. You see, the house in Dawn of Fear is very large, and there are a lot of keys you will need to find in order to unlock all the rooms in the house. And if you forget where any of these locked rooms are, well, you're pretty much screwed. Because for some goddamn reason, there is no in-game map in Dawn of Fear. You simply need to either create your own map, or somehow remember where everything is. I mean, I suppose you could just look up a playthrough on YouTube if you got really stuck, but as I've recently discovered, YouTube isn't always the best place to visit if you're trying to figure out how to do something. Yeah, okay, I've got that. What next? Alright, yeah. Hold up, slow down for fuck's sake. Jesus, you're going too fast. Oh, fuck this. For the most part, I'm a fan of how Dawn of Fear handles its fixed camera perspective. The camera is almost always placed perfectly, allowing you to see just enough without outright spoiling where everything is the second you enter a room. You will still need to occasionally listen out for the groan of a monster to tell if a room is safe when you enter it, but that's all part of the fun in my opinion. However, while the camera is perfect 95% of the time, there are still occasions where the camera is placed in such a way that makes it almost impossible to see hidden areas. I mean, take this room for example. How the hell was I supposed to know there was a door down here? I know I've complained a lot about Dawn of Fear during this review, but that's only because it's a shit game. Kidding. Truth be told, I didn't hate Dawn of Fear. It has enough enjoyable aspects to make it worth a purchase when it inevitably goes on sale. Exploration and puzzle solving are enjoyable, monster design is inventive, and combat can be tense and exciting, but there are currently far too many bugs and issues with this game to recommend it at full price. I really think Dawn of Fear will need several patches before I can fully recommend it, but I don't think in any way it's a 34 on Metacritic. That's way too harsh. Hold on a sec. That's better. I love cartoons from the 1930s. You can just feel all the love and passion poured into every single frame of animation. Compared to the cheap-looking, unimaginative cartoons of today, animation from the 1930s really was in a league of its own. However, as someone who is not a racist, regardless of what certain judges may tell you, I do take issue with a lot of the imagery used in some of these cartoons. As much as I love animation from this era, it was also a prime example of how shitty human beings could be to each other. Anyways, 1930s animation seems to be all the rage these days, with games like Cuphead and Enchanted Portals being heavily inspired by cartoons from that time period. Also, I don't care what anyone says, this game is looking really good. Bendy and the Ink Machine is another game inspired by 1930s animation, and it should be immediately apparent to anyone that Bendy's design is meant to pay homage to popular cartoon characters from the time, like Mickey Mouse and Felix the Cat. Although, I don't know. I feel Bendy's design isn't half as inspired as those examples. I get the feeling that anyone could easily draw Bendy without even trying. Here, look, I'll show you. So, you have to start with the head, okay? And the mistake a lot of people make when drawing Bendy is that they think his head is a complete circle, but it isn't. It has like an almost semicircle on the top, so as long as you get that down... Oh, god damn it, I did it again! Bendy and the Ink Machine is a survival horror game that was developed by Kindly Beast and was released episodically over the course of a year and a half, before a complete version was finally released on October 27, 2018. Console versions of the game were released a month later. Bendy and the Ink Machine received mixed reviews, with some critics finding the combat very clunky, while others thought the game was lacking polish overall. The game's length was also a point of contention for some critics, with it being possible to beat the entire game in just over 3 hours. Despite the lukewarm reception by critics, however, Bendy would become a cultural phenomenon overnight, with a shit ton of merchandise lining the shelves of toy shops everywhere. Everything from plushies and coffee mugs to action figures and t-shirts. For Mike Mood, the co-creator of the Bendy franchise, all this success came as a massive shock to him. He claimed that Bendy's popularity was a complete fluke, and that he never foresaw the game becoming as massive as it did. But what exactly happened that caused Bendy to become a household name? Was it thanks to the usual Let's Players screaming their heads off at the game? Was MatPat's in-depth look at the game's story the reason so many people fell in love with the title? Or was it something else entirely? Well, that's what I hope to answer with today's review. Besides, it seems only right that I review this game. After all, my name is Ben, and Bendy does start with Ben. Get it? Because the first 3 letters of Bendy are B-E-N, and that spells Ben, and my name... Hey guys, if you enjoyed that Bendy starts with B-E-N joke, and you'd like to hear more material like that, please remember you can support me on Patreon. Every cent you donate helps me write more jokes like the one you just heard. Link in the description. Anyways, on with the review. In Bendy and the Ink Machine, players assume the role of Henry, a man who used to work as an animator at Joy Drew Studios. At the beginning of the game, Henry receives a letter from his old boss, asking him to return to the studio because there's something he apparently needs to see. Upon arriving at the studio, however, it doesn't take long for Henry to realise something is amiss. There are ominous messages scrawled on the walls in ink. No wall. Dreams don't come true. And trust me, I shall know. Oh, what's this? We're deeply sorry, Ben, but your application for RuPaul's Drag Race has not been successful. We have attached your application photo. Kind regards. But I look beautiful! On top of that, Henry soon discovers what appears to be a dead cartoon character, who actually looks a lot like Goofy. And let me tell you, as someone who wanted to kill Goofy at every opportunity in Kingdom Hearts, this scene already had me considering Bendy as a potential Game of the Year candidate.
Look out!
Yes! Well, alright then. Finally, I'm free of this feckin' dickhead. I'm guessing Nomura isn't the biggest fan of Goofy either, and he just wanted any excuse to kill him off. I'm so fucking happy right now. Yeah, go on, cry. No one gives a shit. I'm loving this. Finally, Mickey Mouse can join my team. Fucking hell. Whew. I know I shouldn't be happy about this, but I'm sorry. I can't.
Goofy.
Hey, fellas!
Goofy!
Why is this happening to me? Or why are these things able to come upon me?
As Henry explores more and more of the studio, he starts to get the feeling that he's being watched by something. Something bendy. In my opinion, this whole first chapter is expertly put together. There isn't really any combat or intense puzzle solving, but the atmosphere in this area is just incredible. The studio feels completely abandoned, and aside from the odd cardboard cutout of Bendy giving me a heart attack. Oh, you motherfucker. You really do feel completely alone in this place. That is, until near the end of the chapter when you come face to face with this monstrosity. With Within seconds, you've gone from happily solving puzzles in a non-threatening environment to suddenly running for your life in an intense chase sequence. It's brilliant, and the game frequently switches things up like this. Be it with a boss fight, stealth sequence, or a clever puzzle, you're very rarely doing the same thing for too long in Bendy and the Ink Machine. That doesn't mean everything the game attempts is executed flawlessly, however. In Chapter 2, Henry encounters these creatures made of ink, and is forced to defeat them using an axe. And like, the combat in this game, it's not good, like, at all. I swear Henry's hitbox is way bigger than you think it would be. I always seem to get hit by guys miles away from me. What's more is that there's very little skill or depth to the combat. You mash the attack button, and that's it. Don't get me wrong, the combat in this game isn't the worst thing ever, but it's easily the weakest part of Bendy's gameplay. By exploring every nook and cranny of the studio, you can find audio logs that fill you in more about the people who used to work in this studio, and what went wrong that dangerous creatures are now wandering the halls of this place. Much like Bioshock, most of the game's story will be told to you through these audio logs, instead of traditional cutscenes, and I've always liked this approach to storytelling. It allows you to get on with playing the game, instead of having to deal with long cutscenes every 10 minutes. Speaking of Bioshock, there are a few other areas where Bendy takes inspiration from that masterpiece. Several areas of Joy Drew Studios will bring back memories of Rapture, and Bendy even features a similar respawn system to Bioshock. When you die in Bendy and the Ink Machine, instead of being sent back to the last checkpoint, you instead respawn at the last Bendy statue you passed, with no progress lost. It works in pretty much the same way as the Vital Chambers in Bioshock. As much as I adore Bioshock, the Vital Chambers pretty much destroyed all challenge in the game, since you could respawn indefinitely, and all enemies you defeated would remain dead. At least Bioshock gave you the option of disabling Vital Chambers. No such luck in Bendy, however. Much of your time playing Bendy will be spent solving simple puzzles, or finding items and then bringing them to someone or something. This gameplay loop can get a little repetitive after a while, especially once you reach Chapter 3 and a character forces you to go on multiple fetch quests. I mean, this whole section just goes on and on. So this character named Alice asks you to find some items for her, so you go find the items and then you bring them back to her. She then asks you to find some more items, so you go find them and you bring them back to her. By the time she was asking me to destroy all cardboard cutouts of Bendy in the area, it became very obvious to me that this whole chapter served no other purpose than to pad out the length of the game. There are some really clever puzzles in the game, including one where you have to play some instruments in the correct order, but I was frustrated that there weren't more moments like this. However, while Chapter 3 mostly sucks, and there aren't enough good puzzles in the game, there are still plenty of moments that stuck with me long after I completed Bendy and the Ink Machine. A great boss fight in a spooky house setting, and a fun fair where you have to complete various minigames to proceed were some highlights for me. There are definitely some weak moments in Bendy and the Ink Machine, but when everything clicks, it's still a very enjoyable experience. Bendy and the Ink Machine's visuals are very eye-catching. The whole game basically looks like an old cartoon, rendered fully in 3D. Think something like 13 on the PS2 and you have the general idea. Unfortunately, these visuals seem to come at the cost of performance, at least on PS4. I can't even describe how infuriating it is to see an indie game with charming yet simplistic graphics running so poorly, even on a PS4 Pro, which is where all the footage you're seeing right now was captured from. The game is locked at 30 FPS on PS4, even though 60 seems like it would have been totally doable. But what's worse is that the game is not even locked at 30, with occasional dips into the 20s. It's not enough to ruin the game, but it's just baffling how poorly optimized this game is on console. Despite its cutesy appearance, Bendy and the Ink Machine can be a genuinely terrifying game at times. A stealth sequence at the end of Chapter 3, where you're forced to collect materials in a dark cave while avoiding a character named the Projectionist, is genuinely one of the tensest experiences you're likely to find in a survival horror game. I'm actually surprised the game got a teen rating. With how dark and horrific a lot of the content in this game is, I'm surprised the developers didn't push a little bit harder to get an M rating. An M rating might have allowed the story to go to some really disturbing places, but as it is, it sometimes feels like the developers are holding back from telling the kind of story they really wanted to, so that the kiddies could also play the game. After all, how would they have sold all that merchandise if the developers had aimed for an M rating? Speaking of the story, I found the plot in this game to be very interesting, but almost incomprehensible at times. If it wasn't for Game Theory's excellent videos on Bendy, I probably wouldn't have had a clue what was going on by the end of the game, and I kinda think that was the point. I feel like the developers of Bendy wanted people to come up with their own theories about what the story in the game means, which is fine, but I look at a game like Five Nights at Freddy's with its confusing plot and thousands of fan theory videos, and I start thinking that the only reason Kindly Beast made the story in Bendy so incoherent is because they wanted to replicate the success of that series. I could be wrong, but I'm probably not. I don't trust people anymore. What? €500? They charged me at least 3 times that. Overall, I really enjoyed my time with Bendy. Yes, it's a short game, but all the best things in life are short, like dwarf weddings. This is so fucking beautiful. I cry every time, I can't help it. It's also a budget title, so for the price you're paying, I think the length shouldn't be an issue for most people. The game has a beautiful art style, engaging gameplay, and can be genuinely scary at times. If you're looking for something spooky to play this Halloween, but are a cheap piece of shit like myself, maybe give Bendy a go. Momodora Reverie Under the Moonlight is a 2D Metroidvania developed by indie studio Bomb Service and released in 2016 for Microsoft Windows. A year later, the game would be ported to PS4, with ports for Xbox One and Nintendo Switch coming later. Momodora Reverie Under the Moonlight is actually the 4th game in the Momodora series, but its story is completely separate to the previous games. Reverie Under the Moonlight was very well received by critics, with many reviews praising the game's combat, boss fights and level design. I was initially drawn to Momodora by its art style and setting, which instantly reminded me of Yharnam from Bloodborne, with its gothic castles and Lovecraftian monsters. In Momodora you play as Kaho, a priestess who is travelling to the city of Karst in order to find a way to stop the corruption that is occurring there. This corruption is turning the city's residents into horrific monsters, and has also started to spread to other cities outside of Karst. On the way to the city, Kaho is attacked by various different creatures. This first area basically serves as the game's tutorial level, where you are taught how to use Kaho's weapons, a bow and arrow and a leaf. Yes, you heard that right, a leaf. Don't ask, I don't have any answers for you. I was actually surprised by how difficult Momodora proved to be so early on in the game. Combat is very unforgiving, and most enemies can finish off Kaho in 2 or 3 strikes. Kaho has a special healing item called a Bellflower that functions almost exactly like the flasks from Dark Souls. Her Bellflowers will only be restocked when she finds and rings one of these bells that are littered throughout the world. These bells essentially serve as the game's checkpoints. Also, just like in a Souls game, checkpoints are few and far between in Momodora, and if you die before reaching one, you will have to replay a large chunk of the area you are currently in. It is genuinely one of the best feelings in the world whenever you find one of these bells and are able to activate a new checkpoint. Just before reaching the city, Kaho encounters the first boss fight of the game, and as you might expect, it's a massive spike in difficulty. It is here where most players will have to get used to dodging and using the bow and arrow if they want to have any hope of defeating this thing. However, if the player is able to best this creature, they will have all the tools necessary to complete the rest of the game. Upon reaching the city of Karst, the game world opens up massively, and there is very little handholding from here on out. The player is set free in this massive city, and it is up to them to figure out what to do next. It can initially feel a little bit overwhelming, but thankfully there are plenty of NPCs throughout the city who can give you hints as to where to go next if you ever become stuck. There are also shopkeepers who can sell you powerful items and accessories that will aid you throughout the rest of the game. Despite mostly taking place in a dark and desolate city, there is still a surprising amount of environmental variety throughout Momodora. You'll go from the city streets to a cathedral and even the sewers. Better yet, every area feels distinct from one another, and each of them have their own unique gameplay quirks. For example, while the early areas of the game are more combat focused, some of the later locations, like the sewers, have more of an emphasis on platforming and avoiding traps. Great level design is an essential component of any good Metroidvania, and thankfully, Momodora has one of the best designed worlds of any game I've played. Bosses are another highlight of the game. In fact, they might be my favourite aspect of the game overall. They are all brilliantly designed and an absolute treat to fight. Some of them will probably have you tearing your hair out by the time you defeat them, but they are never unfair fights. They just require you to think on your feet a bit more than usual. Defeating bosses will sometimes result in you unlocking a new ability that will allow you to access previously unreachable areas of the map. Unfortunately, these abilities are pretty by the numbers when it comes to Metroidvanias. You have your usual double jump, and later on you can dash while in the air. They aren't terribly exciting, and I would have liked to have seen Kaho gain access to a lot more unique and fun abilities instead. Regardless, these abilities serve their purpose, and exploration remains fun for the entire duration of the game. Momodora's soundtrack is simply outstanding, and I find myself listening to many of these tracks over and over again on YouTube to this day. No two songs sound the same in Reverie Under the Moonlight. For example, the track that plays while you are exploring Karst City is very moody and foreboding. Which is very different to the track that plays in Whiteleaf Memorial Park, which has a very contemplative and sorrowful feel to it. The absolute highlight of the soundtrack, however, is the track that plays during your fight with Pardoner Fennel. I can't say enough good things about Momodora's soundtrack. It is one of my favourite video game OSTs of all time at this point. Reverie Under the Moonlight surprised me. I didn't expect much going in, but the game ended up being one of my favourite Metroidvanias of all time. Everything just works so well. The combat is really fun. The level design is fantastic and actually makes you want to explore the world to find every last secret. The bosses are challenging and well designed, and the soundtrack is simply to die for. If you have any love for this genre at all, you need to give this game a go at some point. You won't regret it. Hey guys, I decided it would be a nice change of pace to review a modern horror game on my channel for once. So here is my review of the recently released Resident Evil 4 remake. So the RE4 remake is easily one of the best remakes I've ever played. It makes several improvements on the... sorry guys, I just got to go back to get Ashley. Okay, we're good. Fuck. Okay, fuck this. Yomawari Midnight Shadows is a survival horror game developed by Nippon Ichi Software and released in 2017 for the PS Vita, PS4 and PC. Yomawari Midnight Shadows is the sequel to the PS Vita title Yomawari Night Alone, although it is not necessary to have played that game to be able to follow along with the plot of Midnight Shadows. Yomawari Midnight Shadows received generally favourable reviews from critics, who praised the game's terrifying atmosphere, touching story, and beautiful hand-drawn art. However, some critics also considered the game to be too similar to its predecessor, and that it didn't do enough new to warrant its existence. As someone who has played both games, however, I have no problem telling you that Midnight Shadows is easily the superior game in my opinion. The story is significantly more compelling, and the gameplay has been tweaked in a number of subtle ways, like the inclusion of indoor areas and having tighter level design. In fact, if you are new to the Yomawari series, I'd recommend just skipping Night Alone altogether and moving straight on to Midnight Shadows, but I am getting ahead of myself. Yomawari Midnight Shadows begins with an entry from a young girl's diary. In it, we are told that the girl's name is Yui, and that her dog died yesterday. We are then shown Yui visiting the woods in order to bury her dog, although it is very clear that she still has a very much alive dog, so I don't understand why she's making such a big deal about all this. Shortly after burying her dog, Yui's other dog, Chako, runs off further into the forest, and the player is given control of Yui. This section serves as Yomawari's tutorial, where the player is instructed on how to move, run, tiptoe, push objects, and various other actions. Eventually, Yui finds her dog, but for some reason, she decides to throw a stone in order to distract him, while she quietly slips away by herself. A short trek later, and Yui arrives at a tree, where she decides to hang a noose from one of the branches.
The preceding program contains scenes of extreme violence and should not have been viewed by young children.
This scene really caught me off guard the first time I played Midnight Shadows. I wasn't expecting this cutesy horror game to begin with a child committing suicide. And unlike most child deaths shown in video games, there is nothing funny about the way Yui dies. It's brutal and could be very upsetting to a lot of people. We are then shown a flashback of Yui and her close friend Haru attending a fireworks festival. While at the festival, Haru tells Yui that this will probably be the last night they will spend together, since Haru is moving away at the end of the summer. However, a short time later, Haru decides that she is never leaving and will stay in town with her friend, no matter what. Once the fireworks have ended, Yui and Haru decide to head home. However, since it has gotten very dark, they need to use their flashlight to find their way around. A short time later, Haru begins hearing voices around her and asks Yui to go and investigate by herself. Yui finds a red lease a short distance away, which leads to one of the best fourth wall breaking jump scares I have ever experienced in a video game. Yui is apparently caught by the strange creature, and we are put in control of Haru, who will become our main protagonist for the rest of the game. Haru begins searching for Yui, but it isn't long before she also comes face to face with the terrifying monsters of this town. This is the first proper chase sequence in the game, and is a good opportunity to get used to how the stamina meter works. So usually while exploring the town, Haru will be able to run for a decent length of time. However, whenever she is panicked or getting chased by a monster, her heart rate will increase and she will run out of breath much quicker. You can refill your stamina gates by walking for a few moments instead of running, but something the game doesn't tell you is that you can actually refill your stamina gates much quicker by holding down the tiptoe button for a few seconds. You will need to get used to how the stamina gauge works very quickly if you plan to avoid dying dozens of times within the first few hours of the game. While being chased by the monsters, Haru eventually finds a bush which she can hide in. Since you can't fight back against the monsters in Midnight Shadows, finding a place to hide is sometimes the only way to get rid of any enemies currently chasing you. Shortly after escaping the woods, Haru decides to visit Yui's house, but unfortunately she has not yet made it home. Haru decides to leave a letter for Yui before finally heading home for the night. We are then once again put in control of Yui, as she awakens in what looks to be a construction yard with no idea of how she got there. This is a short linear sequence where we simply have to get Yui from point A to B without much in the way of enemies or ways to perish. While exploring the town, Yui finds a torn magazine on the ground. All she is able to make out from the magazine are the words, "If you run into it, hands, feet and neck, give them." Yui has no idea what any of this means, but it will be invaluable information for the player soon enough. Yui comes across a trail of blood on the road, and like all great characters in horror fiction, decides it would just be the best idea ever to follow it. The blood trail leads her to quite a disconcerting note lying on the ground. If there is one thing Yomawari Midnight Shadows does phenomenally well, it's building tension. Instead of just showing the monster at the first possible opportunity, it gives the player just enough time to let their imaginations run wild about what might be lurking around the next corner, which can really heighten the anxiety felt while playing this game. It isn't long, however, until Yui finds a severed hand on the ground, and things go from bad to worse. Haru has still not heard from Yui, and so decides to go out again to look for her. Before leaving the house, however, you are able to choose a charm to wear. These charms come with different benefits depending on which one you choose. For example, one charm may allow you to run for longer, while another will allow you to carry more pebbles, which are items you can use to distract enemies. Once you have picked a charm, you can then leave the house and begin your search for Yui. From here on out, you pretty much have full access to the town, except for a few areas that will become unlocked as you make more progress through the story. You can go almost anywhere, and the sheer size of the town can feel pretty overwhelming at first. Thankfully, you also have an easy to navigate map that highlights all the important landmarks in town and how to get to them. You will be looking at this map very frequently, as it will be your best friend in figuring out how to get around the town during the first few hours of the game. Also, can I just say how impressive this map is, considering that it was drawn by a child. It is certainly a lot more impressive than my map, so all I have to do is get a job, and then get a house, and then I get Daddy's love. Yeah, soon. Soon. I am sane. It's Friday, getting on down on Friday. Everybody's looking forward to the weekend week. But what will you be doing around town in Midnight Shadows, I hear you ask? Well, you can simply follow the main quest if you want, which is of course to find Yui. But by going off the beaten path in town, you can find optional items, side quests, and even more bizarre creatures that you would never have encountered during the main campaign. There is a lot of meaningless junk to pick up in Yomawari, and most of it is useless. But if you want to get the complete story and learn more about the town and its inhabitants, it's worth completing as much side content in the game as possible. Regardless of whether you choose to complete side content or continue your search for Yui, you are going to be encountering a lot of weird and wonderful creatures in town. The monster design in Midnight Shadows is probably my favourite aspect of the game. They are also brilliantly designed and creative. Yomawari Midnight Shadows really feels like something Studio Ghibli would dream up if they were ever asked to make a horror game. The game just exudes the kind of creativity you'd commonly find from that studio. Not all monsters in town are harmful to the player, but most are, and you will need to employ different tactics for each if you are to successfully survive for any length of time. For example, these little black creatures are scared of the light and will cover their eyes when your flashlight is shone on them. However, as soon as you turn your back on them, they will begin to chase after you. They are actually very similar to the Boos from the Super Mario series now that I think about it. There are also creatures that require you to pay attention to the environment around you. For instance, every time you see tire marks on the road, you will know that you are about to encounter these flaming tire creatures. Or if you see a ball bouncing out in front of you, you'll know some child demon thing is about to run out after it. Unfortunately, there is quite a lot of trial and error to figuring out many of Yomawari's monsters, and you are going to die a lot before you have learned how to effectively deal with the majority of them. There are also a lot of bullshit gotcha deaths that the player will have almost no chance of avoiding during their first playthrough. I mean, can someone please explain to me how the fuck I was supposed to know this random wardrobe was going to produce spikes that instantly killed me? There were even a handful of occasions where I could not even begin to explain how I died. I mean, take this section. I'm just running along and blam, dead. It wasn't until I replayed this section that I figured out that a woman actually falls from the sky and will instantly kill you if you happen to be running at that time. I mean, how the fuck was I supposed to know that? So when you die in Midnight Shadows, and trust me, you will die, you are sent back to the last save point you used. Similar to classic survival horror games like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, there is no autosave in Yomawari Midnight Shadows. The game will only save when you visit these statues littered around the town, and even then, you need to have a coin in order to be able to save. Coins are littered everywhere around town, and aren't difficult to find, but you still need to be careful not to save every 5 seconds, or you might find yourself unable to save your progress when you really need to. These statues also serve as fast travel points, so that you can quickly warp between areas in town. A very useful feature, especially if you are planning on going for 100% completion. Anyways, getting back to the story, Haru continues her search for Yui, but it isn't long before she comes face to face with one of the most terrifying monsters of the entire series, Mr. Kotowari. Mr. Kotowari is pretty much this game's nemesis character, consistently showing up throughout the game to pursue the player and to give them a goddamn heart attack. He carries a large pair of scissors that will make short work of Haru if she comes into contact with them. Running away and dodging his attacks are all you can really do against this guy. Mr. Kotowari is a terrifying adversary that will stay with the player long after they have completed the game. Anyways, Haru eventually finds a doll lying on the ground and attempts to offer it to Mr. Kotowari in the hopes it will convince him to stop pursuing her. Amazingly, the plan works, and Mr. Kotowari vanishes into thin air, at least for the time being. And that's about all I want to spoil regarding this game's story. Midnight Shadows' narrative deserves to be experienced as spoiler-free as possible. I mean, I probably should have told you that before I went on to spoil a significant portion of the story, but that would have required me to write a second draft of this review, and no way in hell was I doing that.
I wrote a script and I gave it to a guy who reads scripts, and he read it and he said he really likes it, but he thinks I need to rewrite it. I said, fuck that, I'll just make a copy.
Midnight Shadow tells an emotionally draining story about friendship and learning how to deal with loss. The fact that the two protagonists of this game are young girls just makes some of the more heartbreaking moments hit 10 times harder. The ending got to me more than I like to admit, and I even ended up shedding a few tears, which is not something I expected to do, given the cutesy aesthetic of this game. Speaking of the game's cutesy visuals, I didn't expect Yomawari Midnight Shadows to be so fucking terrifying. I felt a genuine sense of unease practically the entire time I was playing the game. You just never know what could be around the next corner, and that uncertainty, mixed with the game's very effective jump scares, meant that I never felt safe in this world. Honestly, I don't think I've ever played a game that has caused me to nearly jump out of my skin as many times as Midnight Shadows has. Despite its cartoony visuals and cutesy protagonists, this is as genuine a survival horror experience as you are likely to find. Death comes fast and often. There is no autosave system, and you must use limited items found in the world in order to save your progress. Your resources are limited and must be used wisely, and there is an emphasis on exploration and light puzzle solving. Yomawari Midnight Shadows really does feel like an old school survival horror game from the 90s, and fans of the genre will find a lot to love here. Yomawari Midnight Shadows' soundtrack is unfortunately not much to write home about. Aside from a truly beautiful credits theme, there is practically no music to speak of in this game. Most of the time, the only sounds you will hear will be Haru's footsteps and the quiet ambience of the city around you. Of course, the monsters will also make awful noises when they are nearby, which is useful as sometimes you won't know where the enemy is, and so will have to rely on your hearing to pinpoint them. So Midnight Shadows' soundtrack is essentially peaceful silence, occasionally interspersed with some truly horrific screeching sound effects, which I'd also imagine is how many people would describe what it's like to listen to my voice. Or a Korn album. At the end of almost every chapter, the player will have to deal with a boss fight. These encounters are usually visually stunning, so I don't want to spoil them all here. They are also easily the most difficult sections of the game, as many of them require some degree of puzzle solving in order to survive. For example, one of my favourite sequences in the game involves being locked in a tiny room while all manner of objects and furniture are being hurled at you. It's a thrilling sequence, but the solution to completing this encounter is a bit obtuse. So earlier in the house you come across a few drawings done by a child. One of them in particular shows some kind of pillar with eyes on fire. However, you pick up this picture well before you actually find the pillar in question, so by the time you reach it, it is very probable that you've forgotten about the child's drawing entirely. I appreciate that the game can be a bit cryptic at times though. Midnight Shadows does not treat the player like an idiot and expects them to be able to use their brains every now and then. If only my girlfriend had that same amount of faith in me. Or my parole officer for that matter. Yomawari Midnight Shadows is a true hidden gem in the survival horror genre. Yes, it may look like a game targeted at children, but behind its cutesy facade is a terrifying experience that had me fraught with unease during my entire playthrough. It also tells a pretty heartbreaking story that is likely to get an emotional reaction from even the most cold-hearted of players. Gameplay is enjoyable, even if many sections require a degree of trial and error in order to complete. It's also not an incredibly long experience, with it being possible to wrap up the main story in about 4 to 5 hours. However, there is also a large amount of side content that will probably double your playtime if you choose to complete it. Yomawari Midnight Shadows is not a perfect game, but it's easily one of the best indie horror games of the last few years, and is a must play if you are a fan of the genre. Fran Bow is a dark fantasy point-and-click adventure game developed by Swedish studio Kill Monday Games and released for PC in August of 2015. Ports to Android and iOS devices would also be released the following year. Fran Bow received decent reviews from critics, who praised the game for its interesting story and evocative art style. The game has also gone on to develop a massive cult following in the years since its release, and with good reason. Fran Bow is unlike any adventure game I have ever played, and is an excellent example of how creative this industry can be when people are able to create the games they are passionate about. Fran Bow tells the story of a young girl named Fran, who ends up in an asylum after witnessing the brutal murder of her two parents. The game begins with Fran recounting to her psychiatrist the events that led up to her parents' deaths. Despite coming across as an intelligent and relatively sane human being, Fran's psychiatrist nevertheless prescribes her medication, which causes her to have intense and sometimes gruesome hallucinations. But to be fair, my medication also has some unfortunate side effects.
That wasn't too bad. I think I'm starting to get the hang of these blackouts. Oh, fuck. Not again.
Despite the horrific nature of these hallucinations, Fran is often required to take her pills in order to solve many of the game's puzzles. For example, there is a hidden stairway early on in the game that is only visible while Fran is hallucinating. Fran's medication serves as a unique puzzle-solving mechanic and differentiates Fran Bow from practically any other adventure game out there. Fran has a dream where she is visited by her cat, Mr. Midnight, who she got separated from on the night of the murders. Mr. Midnight informs Fran that her medication will help her escape the asylum, and also that he will be waiting for her in a nearby forest. Fran awakens shortly afterwards and begins to plot her escape from the asylum. It is at this point where control is handed over to the player. In many ways, Fran Bow plays like your typical point-and-click adventure game. You can inspect objects in your environment, pick up items, and talk to any characters you may meet along the way. Many of the game's puzzles are fairly simplistic in nature, requiring you to simply use an item in your inventory with an object or person in the environment in order to proceed. However, there are a handful of puzzles that legitimately stump me for several minutes at a time. One late game puzzle in particular was so baffling I could not tell you how the fuck I actually ended up solving it. Where Fran Bow differs from your typical adventure game, however, is in its fantastical setting and mature content. I think it's fair to say that Fran Bow holds nothing back when it comes to gruesome and disturbing content. Despite its cutesy appearance, this is not a game for children, and it deals with a lot of sensitive subject matter, like child abuse, mental illness, and grief. It's also a surprisingly violent game, with several scenes that really do come across as needlessly brutal and graphic. If I have one complaint about this game, it's that tonally, Fran Bow is all over the place. One second you are in a beautiful paradise, surrounded by friendly tree creatures, and the next you are watching a cat be disemboweled. And while that might describe a normal Saturday night in my backyard, it's legitimately off-putting at times to see this kind of shit in a video game. Anyway, getting back to the story, Fran begins her escape from the asylum and meets several other children along the way, all of whom are suffering from various different mental illnesses of their own. It can be genuinely upsetting seeing the subhuman way these children are treated by the staff of the asylum, especially when you consider that scenes like this would have been all too common back in the 1940s when this game was set. Fran helps the children in whatever way she can, and in return, they give Fran items which will aid in her escape from the asylum. Every now and then, Fran will encounter a terrifying demon called Remor. Remor seems to believe Fran herself is responsible for the deaths of her parents. Of course, Fran isn't buying any of this, and disregards everything he says. Remor is a pretty scary guy, and to be honest, a lot of this game is very scary. There are some legitimately good jump scares in Fran Bow, which I don't think is something you can say about any other point and click game out there. Eventually, Fran manages to escape the crazy asylum and enters a heads maze, and this next part is just fucking awful. You need to navigate this maze while avoiding these ghost-like thingies. It's a lot like Pac-Man, only somehow shittier. And amazingly, this isn't the only minigame in Fran Bow. So for some reason, the developers thought that it would just be the best idea ever to put awful minigames in between every chapter in Fran Bow. And as a result, when you are not solving puzzles in this game, you are probably enjoying a quick game of Shit Pac-Man, Shit Frogger, or Shit Bit Trip Runner. These minigames are a complete waste of time, and you can even skip them if you want, making their inclusion even more pointless. Once Fran escapes from the maze, she ends up in a strange forest, and this is where the game really started to pull me in. Fran encounters many strange creatures in the forest, including an ant and his best friend, a beetle pig. The ant believes that the beetle pig has eaten Fran's cat, so in order to confirm this, Fran has to kill the beetle pig and search his insides. Fran Bow has such a fucked up sense of humour. I love it. That's one thing I wasn't expecting when I started the game, but Fran Bow is genuinely funny at times. It's incredibly dark humour and definitely won't be to everyone's tastes, but if you click with it, you'll probably find yourself laughing out loud several times while playing the game. Fran soon finds her cat, who has been imprisoned in a house belonging to Siamese twins. Fran meets the sisters, and they tell her that if she wants her cat back, she will have to create a spell that will give them their old bodies back. This is easily my favourite chapter in the game. The spooky atmosphere, the clever puzzles, and the interesting characters. I love all of it. I don't want to spoil the conclusion to this chapter, because it deserves to be experienced firsthand. Eventually, Fran and Mr. Midnight manage to escape the sisters' house, and soon find themselves crossing a precarious looking bridge. Before Fran can make it to the other side, however, the bridge collapses and Fran falls to her apparent death. However, instead of dying, Fran awakens in a mysterious land full of fantastical creatures and almost dreamlike environments. Oh yeah, and she's a tree. Your goal in this chapter is to restore Fran to her human form and to find a way back home. If there is one thing I love about this game, it's how it constantly switches up its gameplay from one chapter to the next. In this chapter, for example, Fran loses her pills, so she can no longer cause herself to have hallucinations. Instead, she is given a clock that allows her to change from one season to another with a simple click of the mouse. This leads to some really cool puzzles that are very satisfying to figure out. For example, at one point you find a guy out in his boat fishing, but if you change the season to spring, the guy is no longer in the boat, allowing you to take it instead to explore more of the environment. I love stuff like this. I think my favourite part about this chapter is how out of place it feels. Everything is so bright and colourful that it makes you question what exactly is going on. Is Fran dreaming this? Is this place a result of her declining mental health? There are hundreds of theories out there regarding what is actually happening within this game's story, but I think at the end of the day, Fran Bow is a game about mental illness, how people cope with it, how we treat it, and how it can overwhelm us if we are not careful. I am surprised a game about mental illness and depression turned out this enjoyable to play, because let's be honest, this kind of bleak shit really shouldn't make for a fun game. Ben does not want to play video games right now. Ben does not feel like listening to music right now. Ben does not feel like quitting the game right now. The last 2 chapters of the game are where some intense revelations are revealed, so I won't talk about them in this video, since I really think this game is best experienced when you know as little about it as possible going in. What I will say is that the final few moments of this game had me feeling a wealth of emotions, from intense anger to almost overwhelming sadness. Honestly, I haven't felt this emotional since that time I saw that documentary about Alex Lewis. Why can't my dad get sick like that? I also can't talk about Fran Bow without quickly mentioning its incredible soundtrack. This might be one of my favourite OSTs from any video game. Many songs are beautifully arranged and have a mysterious, almost dreamlike quality to them that fits this game perfectly. I suppose it's a good thing that the music is so memorable, since it's the only thing you are going to be hearing while playing the game. You see, for some incomprehensible reason, Fran Bow does not feature any voice acting whatsoever. It's all text-based, which is almost unheard of in the adventure game genre. I understand the game was made with a very small budget, but it's strange to see such a fundamental part of adventure game design missing, especially when everything else is polished to a mere sheen. Fran Bow is a masterpiece in the adventure game genre. It is endlessly creative, disturbing, clever, and funny. It has a beautiful soundtrack, stunning artwork, and a heartbreaking story that affected me more than I would like to admit. If you have any interest in this genre at all, you need to experience Fran Bow. It's truly an experience unlike any other. Hey guys, Ben here. I'm just transfixed by this beautiful sunset that is descending before my very eyes. Enjoying a little sparkling water. I've been thinking a lot about how unfair life has been to me lately. I don't understand it. Like, I'm magnificent. I am a magnificent creature. I'm beautiful and intelligent and sophisticated, and I have wonderful hair. And yet, women don't want to bang me. They want to sleep with Bobby and Billy and that guy with the club foot. They don't want to be with me. It's not right. I deserve them more.